Hello, everybody. Welcome to Gusto. Wow, huge crowd out here. I could totally see everyone on the live stream. Want to thank you so much for joining us on Facebook, on YouTube, on LinkedIn. We're going to have an exciting 60 to 75 minutes of a live stream for you today. Why not? We read the entire 5,500 page bill just so you didn't have to. Thank you for joining us with PPP Round 2. We're back in the ring, EIDL and more, everything you need to know as a small business owner about the new stimulus package. Quick housekeeping before we get started is, of course, thank you so much for joining us. Great to have you all here today. We're live on several platforms, like I mentioned, LinkedIn, YouTube, and Facebook. So hang in there if something happens. When you do something live, sometimes things happen. If you have any questions throughout today's live stream, please leave them in the comments. Don't hold on to them. Just kind of get it out there in the wild. We have a team behind here that will surface those comments to our team on our side. And obviously during Q&A, once we get to it, not every question will be answered, but we will give it our best effort, but also look for those resources in great description. Get the latest updates in your inbox before we kind of dive in. Obviously, there's so much to unpack with PPP Round 2, but the way you want to stay totally in tune is signing up for our newsletter. You can go to gsto.co/COVID news. You just need to enter in your first name, email address, hit subscribe, and you'll be off to the races. That's gsto.co/COVID news. My name is Will Lopez, head of Gusto's accountant community. I want to thank you once again for joining us. Also, big shout out to the team members behind the scenes that put this all together. Shout out to Rylan Whalen. They're the masterminds behind what you're seeing right now, and Mohini and Riddy and everybody else on the back end, and Dre, who have really done an incredible job to put together today's event. We're really excited to unpack it. Also want to introduce you to the three experts that will be unpacking. Wave hello, everybody. We have Topher Reynoso, who's our HI and benefits compliance lead at Gusto, Shelly Abril, who is our payroll tax compliance lead, and then Jeanette Quick, who's our head of policy. They'll be the amazing talent in front of today's unpacking of that PPP Round 2. So it's going to be exciting. Hang in there and we'll cover the bases. Here's what's going to happen throughout today's live stream. We're going to cover 5 major areas of Round 2. The first is actually unpacking the PPP Round 2. The second area that we'll cover is the tax provisions and credits, updates to the EIDL, other lending programs. So that way you're up to date with everything that you can tap into, and then how Gusto can help you throughout it all. So without further ado, let's dive into the PPP Round 2. What's new under the stimulus package here at Gusto?
Hey everyone, thanks so much, Will. Really appreciate the intro. Excited to be here with you all today, talking about what's known as the Economic Aid to Hard-Hit Small Businesses, Nonprofits, and Venues Act. Kind of a mouthful. But basically what we're looking at here is an updated version of COVID-19 relief that we saw coming out of 2020. They passed it as part of a Consolidated Appropriations Act, something they do regularly in an omnibus type of bill. But this included a lot of support for small businesses and others during the COVID-19 pandemic. So today specifically, we're going to be talking about how that stimulus package functions to provide emergency aid to workers, small businesses, and we're going to talk a lot about that PPP Round 2, we're going to refer to it as. The funding is meant to be a stopgap until the vaccine and everything else can roll out that can provide a path forward for us to start going back to or developing the new normal. But the purpose of this entire piece of legislation was to help people sort of bridge that gap until they could be back in an environment where they could function under more normal circumstances. So we're going to talk about how to take advantage of that PPP to get there. Oh, next slide. There we go. All right. So a couple things that I want to cover first. Sorry, go back one more for me there. I think we skipped one. There we go. The PPP, as a reminder, the background for this passed back in 2020, kicking off in April. The purpose was to help small businesses stay in business during this economic downturn. Now, the SBA is meant to authorize and approve through intermediaries like banks, any forgivable loans that could be made to eligible borrowers. And they allocated a great deal of money, $525 billion in funds. And it ended up actually, they dispensed more than $525 billion to 5.2 million small businesses. And that was just from April. And then it was set to originally end in June, but ended up getting extended out to August because there were still remaining funds for it. Now, this new stimulus package is meant to build on top of that. So the first round of PPP funding only provided a one-time loan for small businesses. This one adds on top of that. Yes, you can still get a first-time loan if you weren't able to participate last year, but you'll also potentially be eligible for a second round loan if you already got your first round. So that is all going to be launching this week. We want to make sure you have the information to act on that. So sort of level set on our terminology here. Some might say that this is round 3 of PPP because of that extension from June to August that I talked about earlier. But when I'm talking about this, I'm going to refer to the PPP round 1 as everything that happened in 2020. That's when that $525 billion was dispersed last year. And then when I'm talking about PPP round 2, I'll be referring specifically to this new stimulus package that just passed under the economic aid to hard hit small businesses. And that's going to allocate an additional $284 billion in funding for, as I said, new borrowers, as well as second draw borrowers. And so that's the other distinction I want to talk about here. When I say a first draw, that means a borrower who is applying for and receiving a PPP loan for the first time. And second draw is going to be referring to those who now may be eligible for a second round of loans as a result of PPP round 2 legislation that is now law. So taking a look at, what happened in that first round, what were the requirements, just to remind you, and it's actually still applicable, important to understand today for those first-time borrowers. So looking back, if you were an eligible small entity, which they defined as having fewer than 500 employees, you could apply for and receive this PPP loan. Now that included nonprofits, veterans organizations, tribal concerns, self-employed individuals, sole props, as well as contractors. Now, one thing to remember in that is if you're a sole prop, you're a small business that hires contractors, you aren't supposed to include those contractors in your numbers. They're supposed to go out and get a PPP loan on their own since they're eligible to do so. So all of that happened in this first round. Entities that had more than 500 employees under certain circumstances could still be eligible. So if you have multiple locations and each of those locations have less than that limit, you could still be eligible for it. You'll want to talk to your lender to make sure that you understand the specific requirements there and any additional information they might need. The loan maximums for this first round, basically you calculated out your monthly payroll costs. And there were some specific rules that were kind of a roller coaster there over a few months as we figured out what they were exactly telling us to use in order to calculate monthly payroll costs. But we're at a pretty stable point now. So we understand what payroll costs, we know what we're supposed to include, what's supposed to be excluded, things like health insurance, vision, dental, also now getting to add a couple of new things like short-term and long-term disability plans. Those types of things can now be added in as part of monthly payroll costs. But basically, you're going to take a look at that average monthly payroll cost, and then you're going to multiply that by 2.5 with a maximum of a $10 million loan. So that's our round 1, first-time loan borrowers. Round 2 is a little different. So in round 2, under this new package, you can still, as I said, get that first draw if you haven't qualified for it yet, or if you just haven't gotten around to it. This is your opportunity. You still have to meet those same requirements that we talked about before, 500 employee max, still a $10 million max for that first draw loan. But now comes this second draw. And so for those who used up the PPP in the first round, or use it in that first draw in the second round, now you can apply for a second one. But the requirements are a little different. So instead of that 500 employee limit, it now drops down to 300 employees. And this is the other part, that economic hard hit piece that's really important to understand. You have to show that you sustained a 25% drop in gross revenue in any quarter of 2020 compared to the same quarter in 2019. So we'll talk a little bit more about that, how to prove it, what's being talked about. We're still fleshing out a lot of information here. We've gotten the first round of rules from the SBA and the Treasury, but we're still waiting for more clarification on some things. But we'll talk about what we do know. One thing that I also want to remind you of, though, is that your business did have to be in operation on or before February 15th, 2020. So if it wasn't in operation, that still applies for round 2. You're not going to be eligible for it, unfortunately. All right, so what are some of the key updates that we're seeing here? Well, first, they give some clarification around what a covered period is. So remember, once you get the loan, if you can remember back to the round 1, I know it might seem like a long time ago for some folks, been a tough several months, but hopefully this can help. In that first round, your covered period, when it first passed, was 8 weeks following when you got the loan. In later rounds, we saw this expanded out to the option of 24 weeks. Now with this round 2, what they're saying is you as the borrower can expand it anywhere from between 8 to 24 weeks. You get to decide which one meets your needs. PPP loans will also now cover additional expenses. So this includes covered operations expenditures, property damage costs, covered supplier costs, and covered worker protection expenditures. Now, these are really important. This change, I think, is going to be crucial for some businesses who had to make a lot of changes as a result of COVID-19. For example, on the covered operations expenditures, you can include any business software, cloud computing service that helps you with business operations. So that could be a product or service delivery. It could be processing payments or tracking payroll expenses, human resources, sales and billing functions. It's also there for accounting or tracking of supplies, inventory, records, and expenses. So a lot of availability for that covered operations expenditure that wasn't previously available. This one as well, property damage costs, allows you to spend the PPP loan in order to pay for vandalism or looting due to public disturbances during 2020. So as long as it wasn't covered by insurance or some other form of compensation, you can use the PPP loan to pay for those property damage costs. You can also handle covered supplier costs. So that includes any supplier of goods that are essential to the operation of your business. So if the expenditure was made and is pursuant to a contract that was in effect before the covered period, then you're eligible to use it for that. However, if it's a perishable good, so if you're a restaurant, you're buying those perishable goods to stay in business, those ones you can use even if it was expended during the covered period with respect to the applicable loan. So if you take on that contract for new perishable goods during your covered loan, that can still be covered. Okay, and lastly, the last one here, covered worker protection expenditure. This one's very broad. Reading through the bill, we realized that there's a lot of opportunity to help folks here who had to make adjustments to their business. So if in following HHS, CDC, OSHA, or any state or local government requirements for your business, you had to, for example, purchase, do some new maintenance or renovations of your business, you had to expand the drive-through, or you needed to expand indoor or outdoor seating, if you had to build physical barriers, health screening costs, all of that can now be included as eligible expenses for your PPP round 2. So really important to be able to identify that you've got opportunities out there for additional help with this PPP loan. It's not just the payroll portion, but remember, you still have to spend that 60% on payroll costs. All right, I know that was a long slide.
Yeah, Topher,
Well,
actually, I have a quick question for you. Phoebe
sure.
asked, related to this PPP round 2 and some of the updates, she wasn't able to pay herself for a few months because of the economy. Will this affect how she qualifies for the payroll loan or payroll costs?
No, in terms of your maximum loan, it's still going to be calculated. We actually have 3 options now for a regular business. You can use your 2019 calendar year. You can use all of those months and average it. So you're still going to receive, even if in 2020 you weren't able to pay yourself, you can still use your 2019 average monthly cost to get that maximum loan. You do also have the option to use 2020. And the third option is you can use the 12 months trailing when you get the loan. But in all likelihood, we've tried to map out every possibility on here. It's almost every time 2019 is going to be your best bet for the maximum loan.
Great, thanks. And appreciate the question, Phoebe.
Yeah, thanks, Phoebe. Moving on to our next slide. Who's eligible for the first draw? Already talked about this, 500 or fewer employees. It basically stays the same, 2.5 times your average monthly cost. But the things that are a little different, your timing now, starting this week, they're supposed to be accepting applications. Now, we've heard there have been some delays on some of that, and a lot of CDFIs and banks and lenders have not been able to get through just yet. But technically, it was supposed to start on January 11th for certain entities and open up for everybody else, hopefully starting today. But we're hearing that there may be some delays there. We're hearing maybe Friday is more likely for most lenders, or maybe even Monday. But technically, under the bill, it should have started today, assuming everyone was ready to go for it. So who's this one good for? Still, as we said, anyone who suffered those economic losses, who's trying to make sure that they can pay their employees, even if you weren't taking advantage of it in the first round. I know there was a lot of hesitancy. Some businesses were worried because you hear the word loan and you think, oh man, I can't afford to take on a loan right now. PPP is a very different type of loan. So now is actually a really good time. If you can qualify for this, you should really consider taking it, because we've seen full forgiveness, 100% forgiveness go towards so many entities at this point. All right, so round 2, our second draw. This is the unique one, all brand new. Now, you had to have previously received a first draw PPP, and you had to use or will use the full amount for authorized uses before your second draw starts. So that means, you got to hit that. We are still awaiting some clarity on this, but as far as we can tell, you have to hit the 60%, 40% requirement in your first loan in order to receive full forgiveness. And you had to use all of the amount that you borrowed on eligible expenses in order to qualify for a second draw. The second piece is you have to have less than 300, which we already talked about. Now, this next one is causing a little bit more confusion. Can you demonstrate at least a 25% reduction in gross receipts between comparable quarters in 2019 and 2020? Now, especially for smaller businesses, this can be really difficult, because a lot of small businesses don't do this on a quarterly basis for P&L or thinking about it that way. And so one of the things that we've learned from the recent regulations that were sent out is that a business can also use their 2019 tax against their 2020 tax. So you can look at your annual filings for 2019 versus 2020. And if you can show a 25% reduction, which, by the way, you do not include any funds you got from your first draw in calculating that. So don't include that first draw amount when you're thinking about, did I get a 25% reduction in what we made from 2020 compared to 2019? Now, I know that caused some concern at first, because it's like, well, I haven't filed taxes for 2020 yet. How am I supposed to be able to do that? The good news is you don't actually have to provide that proof at the time that you apply. You do, however, have to provide it once you're filing for forgiveness, applying for forgiveness. So make sure between the date that you get your loan and when you're applying for forgiveness, that you're able to take care of those taxes, which, if you choose between 8 to 24 weeks after you get your loan, you should have plenty of time to make sure you can get there and show it.
Super quick question.
Yeah, please.
Nick, or actually Coach Miguel, thank you, Coach. He asked just very quickly, what documents will you need to demonstrate that the quarterly revenues decreased over 25%? Is it just simple P&L?
So they actually give you a lot of options. They say that you can use bank statements, you can use a P&L, you can use quarterly tax filings if you had those available. But what I'll say is talk to your lender, because your lender will have the specifics of what they're expecting for this. But what we do know is you can definitely use those quarterlies and you can definitely use those annuals. So if you already know, yeah, I've got at least a 25% reduction, you should feel pretty confident going forward with getting the loan. If not, one of my suggestions would be, if you can get there before March 31st, try to get those taxes done so that you can then apply for the loan, knowing that you've got tax returns, those annuals that can show the 25% reduction between 19 and 20.
All right, cool. Super quick question just from Nick, and quick answer, I presume. Can single prop still use the 2.5 taxable income like the first round?
Yes. So your 2.5 is still available, no change there. But there is a difference for the second draw, actually, for anyone in the accommodation and food services business. So if you fall under the NAIC code for accommodation and food services, which I believe was 72, if I'm remembering correctly off the top of my head here, should have written it down. It's 3.5x the monthly payroll costs instead of that 2.5. Same timing, no different than the first draw that we just reviewed. So January 13th, supposed to be open today for everyone else, but we'll see who can get there. More likely than not, we'll see some delays there. Jeanette's going to talk in a little bit about some of the opportunities, which lenders we think are going to be ready. So if you weren't eligible last time, what may make you eligible this round? Well, they expanded the PPP to be available to direct marketing organizations, 501Cs, housing co-ops, newspapers, broadcasters, radio stations. They tried to include some other ones that had previously been barred. Unfortunately, well, probably honestly the right thing, it still restricts any publicly traded companies. So anyone that's publicly traded, regardless of how many employees or if you would have otherwise been eligible, still not allowed to participate in this round. Also, it added a few sections to provide funding for venues who were shuttered during COVID-19. And so if you take the venues who take if you are a venue who takes the shuttered venue grant, then you can't also take a PPP. But this will be pretty limited. Probably not too many folks are going to be jumping on this one. PPP is going to be the one that most people are going to qualify for and that they'll want to focus on. All right, so this round tried to get more targeted funding towards certain types of entities and certain types of lenders. So PPP loan funds had set-asides for smallest businesses, those with 10 or few employees. And so if you're on the smaller side, it's good to know that there's actually a specific set-aside that this money must be spent and is allocated towards those smaller entities. They also have set-asides for community-based lenders, CDFIs, credit unions, minority depository institutions, trying to make sure that they're able to disperse these funds across the country, across all different demographics, trying to ensure that everyone gets access to it. But remember, in all of this, it's still a first come, first served basis. So the sooner you can get those applications in with high confidence that you can get to 100% forgivable expenses, please get in there as soon as possible to make sure that funding doesn't run out. Now, luckily, it didn't run out in the August disbursement, but we can't assume that it's going to be the same thing here. We may have seen higher confidence now that we've got a lot more folks who've experienced 100% forgiveness. That may raise some of the confidence and folks jumping out to grab those loans. So make sure you get in there early. You'll also hear from Jeanette in a little bit, who will tell you a little bit more about, the CDFIs and specific opportunities with lenders, and give you some lists or links to lists that you can go chase down and see if they're ready to go. So forgiveness expanded in a few different ways. We already talked about, that 8 to 24 weeks. Now you get to choose what's best for you. Remembering though that 60% has to go towards those payroll costs. Now they did expand payroll costs, what can be included there a little, with the addition of vision, dental, short-term, long-term disability, and life insurance. And so those costs that previously had been excluded for those lines of coverage are now available to be included as part of payroll costs. So whatever the employer is contributing towards those things, that also gets to get counted in order to raise the maximum loan that you can receive, as well as in calculating how much of your loan went towards payroll costs, that's 60%. We also talked about, in review, those additional forgivable expenses. Don't forget about those, your technology services, your supplier costs. If you only got to 70% of your payroll expenses or costs because, unfortunately, maybe you weren't able to hire everyone back, or you had to decrease hours, that's okay. You can find that other 40% in these new categories as well: technology services, supplier costs, protective equipment. Remember, making modifications to your facilities, all of that gets to be counted this round. We're still a little unclear with some of these new provisions about whether or not this loan forgiveness is retroactive, but based on our reading of the language, we believe that is actually retroactive. And so those costs that you took on related to those expenses may still be included in a loan that maybe hasn't been fully forgiven back in round one. Of course, check in with your lender, as I'm going to say with most things here. You want to confirm that that information is accurate, that they're reading it the same way and going to process it the same way that we're interpreting it. Also, speaking of forgiveness, huge change that's going to help a lot of those folks who took less than 150,000 K in their PPP loans, as well as for the round two ones. Simplified forgiveness became very clear in this new round of legislation. A one-page form that basically puts the onus on the employer to represent that they did spend 60% on payroll costs and indicate how many employees they were able to retain because of the loan, as well as the total loan amount. So this should make it a lot easier. Now, I'll add a small caveat to that one, because they do still have the ability to audit. And if you can't actually prove that those things that you certified here are true, then you could still be in trouble. So you want to make sure that this is all true, but you don't have to be as meticulous about the paperwork when you're applying for the forgiveness itself. There's no specific format that's required for you if you took less than 150K, the way that we saw with Schedule A and Schedule A worksheet and all of these things for the first round. So if you had less than 150K, and if you take less than 150 in round two, whether it's a first draw or second draw, you do have the opportunity for this simplified forgiveness that hopefully will take a lot of pressure off folks and encourage them even more to take these loans if they're available to them.
So I have a really great question that Deborah has asked with a couple thumbs up from other people who are commenting. She said, does round one PPP need to be forgiven before applying for round two?
Great question. Technically, the language says that your first draw has to be processed. If it is unprocessed, then you cannot go forward with a second draw. Now, what on earth that means is something that we're trying to unpack right now. Both the lenders, the payroll providers, accountants, we're all trying to figure out and get really clear direction from them. What I would assume, or our best guess at this point, is you have already applied for forgiveness. It is already processed with the SBA. And now you can go in and get that second draw. So it may not be just, oh, I've sent the application over to my lender. It may actually require that it's been processed by the lender, sent over to the SBA, funded by the SBA, and finished processing with them. We're told that that process is supposed to be going a lot smoother and faster this round. They should be better prepared. They moved actually to a new system for processing these. So we're hoping that that's not going to be something slowing anybody down, but definitely stay in touch with your lender as those updates happen to make sure that they give you the thumbs up to go forward with that second draw. They should catch it and let you know before anything happens, but something you definitely want to be aware of. Okay, so we're getting to the end here on the PPP stuff. I know it's a lot of information, but of course the question on timing, when can I do this and how long do I have? And the answer is you can start technically today, like we said, but it's probably more likely you'll see applications being accepted and processed Friday or Monday. Listen to Jeanette's section. She'll point you in the right direction to find that out and get in there as early as possible. But in the question of how long, you have till March 31st, 2021 to apply for a first draw or second draw in this round 2. So make sure you're getting those applications ready. But again, I wouldn't push it out that far. We don't know what's going to happen with the funding here. There's less than there was last time, and we'll see how quickly that gets utilized. All right, and our last one here, the SBA did release the round 2 application form. This, though, is really more focused on the first draw applicants. So if you haven't already gotten a PPP loan, take a look at that application that came out. Gives you a really good sense of what's going to be expected when you get to the lender. That way you're ready to go as quickly as possible. We are still standing by for the new forgiveness application, that one-pager, as well as more details on the second draw application, which we should have more answers here in the next few days. In line with when we think the lenders are going to be ready to start taking those. We do have a list of confirmed PPP lenders, as well as CDFI and MDI lenders who may be ready. Remember, those CDFI ones and MDI ones were able technically to start accepting and processing applications on Monday. Through today, they were the exclusive ones. So you can take a look at that list as well. And then, of course, we've got some fintech lenders that you can take a look at to find the one that's right for you.
Awesome. Well, for those who don't know, all these links, they're all in the description of the video, of the live stream. So go there now, you can click them. They'll stay there. I saw a few comments about whether or not this video will stay up on YouTube. Yes, it will stay up. We will keep this hosted so that way you can go back and point to it. Thank you so much, Topher, for all your expertise. For everybody watching, give him a shout out. Big snaps to Topher. He'll be here till the end. So he's not going away. You'll want to ask more Q&A. So hang in there. We're going to switch now to tax provisions and credits, new tax breaks and updates to the CARES Act and the FFCRA tax provision. I'd like to obviously introduce you to Shelly. She'll be taking care of this section. So Shelly, take it away.
Hi there. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. We're super excited to share with you some of the changes that have happened with the latest COVID relief package. It's actually a lot of good news. So at a time when I think we all really needed to hear some good news. First up, sort of tying back to Topher's presentation on the PPP loans, out of the 2020 legislation, there was a lot of back and forth with IRS about whether or not expenses that were covered by forgivable PPP funds, if those expenses would later be deductible. And there was some flip-flopping going back and forth and a lot of scuttlebutt on this topic. But where we landed with this latest legislation is that it in fact will be fully deductible, so long as they're considered ordinary and necessary business expenses. And if they were in a forgiven or forgivable PPP loan, those will be fully deductible for you. So that's a reason to celebrate. A lot of businesses, I think, were really nervous. A lot of CPAs very nervous There were rumors that taxes could increase as much as 37% based on some folks' numbers. So I think folks are really excited to see this pass. And so just wanted to start with a little bit of really great news there for folks that did participate in PPP last year, or those that expect to participate in these new programs for 2021. We can go ahead and, yeah, thank you. So the other thing I wanted to share, there were a couple other bits of good news. Last year, there was a rollout of a new employee retention tax credit, and that offered 50% off of employees' qualified wages for 2020, up to $10,000 per quarter. I'm sorry, per year. And for 2021, those programs have been extended. And so they've been extended through June 30th of 2021. And extra bonus, the credit has increased. So it's now 70% of the qualified wages. And instead of just $10,000 for the year, it's $10,000 for each quarter. So for the 2 quarters in 2021. They also made it a little easier to qualify for this credit. It previously was a 50% gross receipts decline, and now it's only a 20% gross receipts decline in order to qualify to participate in this credit. They've also increased the threshold for employers that qualify for participation. It was, you had to have 100 employees or fewer, and it's now at 500 employees or fewer. So hopefully opens that up for more customers, more employers. Retroactive to 2020. So the changes that I listed before are applicable only to 2021. A couple extra improvements to the program that take effect retroactively is there's a little bit of clarification. This was another credit that was highly debated about whether or not somebody could participate in PPP and also take advantage of the employee retention credit. What the latest clarification looks like is so long as you're not using the funds that were forgiven in a PPP loan, you can participate in the employee retention credit. You just can't double benefit. So if you weren't, if there were periods of time where you did not get your PPP funds forgiven, then those wages are eligible for the employee retention credit. I do want to call, oh, can we go back up? Sorry. On the employee retention credit, I did want to call out too, we are hearing from some of our clients that they didn't qualify for PPP, and it looks like they may still not qualify for PPP if they didn't have a big drop in gross receipts this year. Revenue is fine, but maybe just their expenses have increased. I just want to throw this out there that this might be a program to look at to see if this might help meet your needs. If you only experience a 20% decrease in revenue and so aren't qualifying for all the requirements for PPP, employee retention credit might be a great alternative for you. And I did want to throw out too, there was further clarification in the new bill, and this again goes retroactive to 2020, that group health plan expenses can also be considered qualified wages, even if you didn't pay your employee during those periods. So hopefully that helps with adding additional credit and putting more money back in your pocket. We can go to the next slide now. Thank you. Coming out of the Families First Act, there was a new paid sick leave program and a new paid family leave program for employees that had they had to take time off of work in order to care for either themselves or for family members that were sick with COVID. And that was set to expire the end of 2020. The good news is, oh, and I should clarify, the employers that paid their employees these sick leave wages or paid family leave wages were eligible to take a credit against those for those wages against their tax liability. The good news is that the credits have been extended through March 31st of 2020. I'm sorry, 2021. The one thing I'll clarify here though is that there's no longer a requirement that employers pay their employees for sick leave or family leave. But if you do choose to do so, to help out your employees going through a tough time, you will be eligible to take that credit through March. Okay, we can go ahead and thank you. A couple other tax credit programs we wanted to highlight here for you today. And this is maybe more on an individual basis, but folks that previously would qualify for earned income tax credit or the additional child tax credit, if they saw a drop in their 2020 earnings or income, and therefore would no longer have been eligible for these credit programs for 2020, for tax year 2020. This new bill provided help for those individuals so they can use their 2019 income in order to still qualify for these credits. So if you experienced a drop in income as a result of COVID and disruptions to your work or your business, you could still qualify for these credits in using your 2019 figures. I did want to highlight also a couple of other tax credits that were extended. They were set to expire at the end of 2020, and they got a nice bump for the next 5 years. So there's the new markets tax credit, which helps businesses that are investing and conducting businesses in low-income communities and areas. And then there's also the work opportunity tax credit, also set to expire last year. And that was extended until 2025. And this program, just want to highlight, if you're looking to hire individuals and restaff up your teams, if you've had folks that have maybe joined other firms or have been unable to return to work for whatever reason, and you're needing to start to rehire, these are great programs to look at to see if it can offset some of your payroll costs for 2021. I think with that, I can go ahead and pass that back to Will.
Yeah, well, actually, I was going to ask you a question. 41
Sure.
CCUP mentioned, is there an application process for the ERC? How do we apply?
For the ERC, there's not an application process. You can talk with whoever's responsible for your payroll and inform them that you're interested in applying the employee retention credit. But just make sure that you talk with a tax professional to make sure that you don't have a conflicting program. The other thing I would look at doing is the IRS has not published all of the guidance. All the FAQs are still showing the 2020 rules instead of the 2021 rules. I would wait until those FAQs have been updated to make sure that you're applying them appropriately and following the new guidance. And then you can apply those with some confidence. So step one, I would wait for the FAQs. And then step two, I would talk with the tax professional just to make sure that you've got, you're not going to double dip.
Great. Thank you. All right. Well, thank you, Shelley. Thank you so much for your expertise. We're going to keep moving. We're making great time. We're going to cover the EIDL, the Economic Injury Disaster Loans, updates from the SBA's EIDL lending program. We're going to introduce Jeanette. Obviously, big claps, maybe clap emoji for Shelley. Give her a big clap emoji. But Jeanette, take it away.
Hi there. Excited to be talking to you today about economic injury disaster loans. As with PPP, this is kind of like it's a second chapter of what we saw from 2020. So in 2020, there was a pool of funding available for businesses to take advantage of that the SBA administers called economic injury disaster loans. There was a part of the program that was related to grants, and the funding for the grants ran out very quickly in 2020. And the new law has actually created a new pool of funding for the grants. So we'll go walk through all of that. And just to step back a little bit and tell you a little bit more about what economic injury disaster loans are, which some folks call EIDL. So I will refer to them as EIDL loans. So EIDL loans are, unlike PPP, they are kind of true loans. You can get them directly from the SBA. So they also another distinction that I'd like to make clear is that you do not need to go to a private lender for EIDL loans. You go directly to the SBA's website. And the loans are structured in such a way that you do have to pay them back, but they are at a lower interest rate than many can get in the market. And they come with a feature called the EIDL Advance, which is up to $10,000 and does not have to be paid back. Now, last time around back in 2020, the EIDL Advance portion of this funding ran out very quickly, and many people were not able to get the EIDL Advance part of it. I think something like 4 million businesses applied, and only only a fraction of that was able to get the advance. Further, many people are only able to get up to $1,000. And so this time around, they've made some changes so that people should be able to take advantage of the full $10,000 grant piece of it. So we'll get into that. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, the EIDL loan is more broad than PPP and is a proper kind of loan that you think of where you take it out, you have to pay it back, and there's an interest rate. However, there are many attractive features related to the EIDL that I think is important for businesses to be aware of, particularly if you have additional expenses that won't be covered by PPP, or if the PPP funding just simply isn't enough for you, and you want to have more certainty about capital access, as well as, there's the dollar amounts are higher and can be spread out over a longer period of time. So we've listed here some characteristics of the EIDL loans. You can use the funding for sick leave, payroll, materials, and other obligations that are really intended to meet your needs that you are not able to meet during this time of crisis. The loans are also available up to $2 million. So obviously this is a much higher amount than PPP, meaning that you can spread out how you spend the funding over a longer period of time if you like. And really, besides this, the direction on kind of general expenses that you can spend your money on, there's no forgiveness kind of part of this, right? Because it's a loan. So you generally will not have to go back and prove how you've spent your funding and things like that. So it's also at a fixed interest rate for up to 30 years, 3.75%, which is markedly lower than what is available in the private market. And at this time, the payments are also deferred for 1 year. So that is intended to make sure that folks have time to be able to use the funds and make it through the pandemic.
Jeanette, a couple quick questions that are rolling in. Hopefully you have some quick answers. Number one, Brandon, thank you so much for your question. Can you apply for a second EIDL if you've already received one?
Yes. I think that I guess two parts to that answer. One is if you did not receive your full grant, we'll get into the options there. So the $10,000 grant, as I mentioned, many people that applied for that grant did not get the full amount or didn't get anything at all. So the law is clear that certainly you can apply for that if you are in particular categories. There's geographic and revenue restrictions on who can apply for kind of making sure that you can take advantage of that gap between either what you did receive that was less than 10,000, or if you didn't receive anything, you can go up to 10,000. And I think if you have already received a full EIDL loan, you can apply again. I think to the extent that you're representing the same harm, and if you've already taken the maximum amount, for example, you may not be able to get that second one if you've already taken a $2 million loan. But if the first time around you took, maybe a couple $100,000, you specified that you wanted less than your full maximum, I think you will be able to take a second one. So I think we would recommend that you apply with the SBA. I mean, it's really kind of up to them as to whether to grant that loan. But I think that if you haven't already taken up your $2 million, then I would think that it's available to be taken again. Thank you for that question.
Second question, if you can answer it quickly, from Benjamin. On the SBA website, it says EIDL Advance grant is already closed. Have any insight to that?
Yes. So the reason it says it's already closed is because they actually have not reopened since the new law was passed. So it's actually providing the information from the last time around. So they have actually published that they will open applications for this round on January 17th. So we haven't seen that portal open yet, basically, for this latest iteration. But definitely log into the website in a couple of days and take a look and reapply if you have already applied once before. I recommend reapplying. I think that SBA has said that basically that there's kind of a first come first serve element, but also if you applied at a different time when the portal wasn't open yet, it's worth applying again.
Great, thank you so much. We'll keep the show going.
Great, thank you for that question. So just as I mentioned here, we kind of touched on this a little bit, but one of the biggest changes to EIDL is that there's an additional pool of funding in these advances for business owners. And this was really great because these advances do not need to be paid back, right? So a business that qualifies under this category is able to access up to $10,000. So there are certain characteristics that need to be satisfied, qualifications that need to be satisfied in order to access up to $10,000. And just to be clear here, so a general business potentially is also able to access up to $10,000, but I think that's kind of We'll see how the pool of funding goes. Whereas this category of businesses basically has special access and special like guarantees to the $10,000. And so the qualifications that we went through here, the business has to be under 300 employees, has to have suffered revenue loss of greater than 30%, be in a low-income community, and have been in operation by January 31st, 2020. Now, one of your biggest questions here might be, what does it mean to be in a low-income community? So that is a little bit of a tricky question, and they haven't put out complete kind of information or guidance on this front yet. There is a definition in the law that basically ties the definition of low-income community to census tract information. And there are different definitions that federal financial regulators use about what is low-income community. I think it remains to be seen what exactly the SBA will use, but there are approximations out there that you can look at. You can look at the census tract information as to the definition of low-income community. You can also look at something called the FFIEC, the Federal Financial Institutions Examination Council, the FFIEC definition of low income as well. And there are tools out there that kind of triangulate between those two sources and try to figure out if you're a business and you have your business address that you can type into a database, you know, whether there's kind of a guesstimate as to whether you're in that low income community or not. So, you know, you can certainly start prepping for that and think about that. Okay, so just a little bit more here on exactly, you know, how you know that you're eligible for both the EIDL and PPP. So they did make some changes to make clear that the EIDL advances are not taxable, and the business can also deduct the qualified expenses that you would normally deduct from your taxes, even if you pay those expenses with EIDL funds. So that's a huge change. That was something that generated a lot of questions over the past 6 to 9 months or so. And the other piece that was creating a lot of anxiety was whether or not SBA was forgiving PPP loans completely when you had received an EIDL advance. And so they've made a change to that to make it clear that your EIDL advance amount, which some businesses had proactively deducted already from the amount that they asked for in PPP, that is not kind of like a double deducted from the PPP forgiveness amount. So that's a good change as well to make clear that people can really take advantage of both PPP forgiveness and the EIDL advance. However, it is also important to note that people cannot receive both an EIDL loan, and I make a distinction here between the EIDL loan and the EIDL advance, an EIDL loan and a PPP loan together. So that's also really important to think about. And for businesses to kind of individually evaluate, you know, which of these may be better for you. Is it better to have that forgiveness, smaller dollar amount PPP loan that's forgivable, or is it better to have a longer term, higher dollar amount, maybe, you know, additional expenses, qualifying EIDL loan? So that's something I think, you know, every business will have to figure out for themselves. But certainly we can help provide some guidance on what the law says. Next slide.
Awesome. Well, the next slide is actually the transition over to the other lending programs and relief, which Jeanette will continue to cover. We're going to try to power through the remaining slides. We'll answer questions at the end. We're logging all the questions behind the scenes. So once we get to the Q&A, we're going to just power through a lot of those questions if we can get to it. So Jeanette, continue.
Great. So I'm excited to mention to you a couple of other SBA loan programs. Oh, and one other thing I wanted to mention, building on what Topher presented on. So we have heard information about the PPP portal opening that has been a little bit updated. So the last information that we heard is that small lenders under $1 billion in assets will be open on Friday. So that's kind of building on, so CDFIs, Community Development Financial Institutions, went live Monday. On Wednesday, they went live with second draw loans. Friday, small community institutions will be open, and the rest of the lending community should be open next Tuesday. So just an FYI heads up to you all as you're kind of thinking about your options for PPP lenders and who you're going to go to for your PPP. There are differences in timelines depending on who you go to. And again, we have a list of lenders that are participating in PPP in the description to the video. So be sure to check those out. Now to just dive into the SBA loan program. So I know that a lot of folks really were not so familiar with SBA kind of before the pandemic, but it really has an incredible amount of different programs and options that it offers. We linked a chart in here of different SBA loan options, but and it's very detailed. There's a lot of kind of like nuance and information about all these different types of loans: 7A, SBA Express, capital lines, community advantage, working capital. There's kind of like a whole slew of 10 different programs. So definitely check that out and determine whether those options will help you. Many of them are administered also through private lenders. That's also something that's important to know. If you already have a relationship with private lenders, maybe through PPP or otherwise, it may be worth asking whether they're also offering any other SBA loans. And there are a couple new changes in the law to some of these specific programs that are worth kind of pointing out here. One of them, actually, can we go to the last slide, because I think this is important to mention. That first slide there on.
You said first slide or last slide?
The first slide.
Okay. Yep.
Just because this piece of it's pretty important, I think, for businesses, which is that if you do take advantage of 7A 504 microloans, the SBA is actually making your payments for up to 8 months. And that's something that that did exist in the CARES Act, and they've extended it out, and they've also created additional subsidies for underserved businesses to extend that out actually from 6 months to an additional 3 months. So it actually can go up to 9 months in some cases. But that's really important because I think that gets a little bit of underknown or kind of underreported in talking about the SBA loan programs and what both the CARES Act and this new law have done for businesses. Is that this is pretty significant that you get your loans paid for you. And unlike the EIDL, which the EIDL loan has a 1 year of deferral, but those payments are still due, right? Like your payments are deferred for a year, but you still owe those payments. Whereas these loans, you do not owe those kind of 8 to 9 months of additional payments for that first year. It's fully paid for you. So that's something that's, I think, really worth mentioning. So we'll move on from there. 7A 504, there's a lot of characteristics here. Here's where we kind of dig into a little more about how you can get some of that payment from the SBA for your monthly payments up to $9,000 a month. Really worth checking out, and just kind of recommend that you look into those programs if you're in need of additional capital. And then finally here, we're going to dig into a little bit. So we mentioned CDFIs and MDIs in the PPP program. We wanted to also mention that CDFIs and MDIs, which are minority depository institutions, also have pools of additional funding that came out of the law to be able to provide resources and funding for the businesses that they focus on, which are historically underserved communities. So this right now we haven't seen exactly how these funds will be deployed, but I think the takeaway here is that there will be additional capital at the disposal of these institutions. So we may see that some more lending options come online coming out of these CDFIs and MDIs. We have put out a list of MDIs and CDFIs on our site, so please check those out. Definitely, especially if you're an underserved business that hasn't been able to access capital, we think more will come online. And then finally, the economic provisions that I think probably many of you are aware of more from an individual capacity, that there are direct payments that have already made their way somewhat through the system. I think millions of the direct stimulus payments have already gone out. So these are $600 payments to individuals that make less than $75,000 a year. And the unemployment insurance payments have also been extended out a couple of months. So thank you very much and look forward to questions.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Jeanette. Everybody give her a fire emoji. How about that one? Just fire emoji. This is my version of the fire emoji. Here's how Gusto can help. We're at the finish line. We're ready to punch through a lot of those questions that you're asking. Drop them all in now if you have more. But there are features designed to support SMBs in COVID-19 through Gusto specifically. Inside Gusto, you can actually streamline your PPP application. You can learn more about that at Gusto in the description, or with the link in the description of this live stream. But you can actually pull your PPP report, use that to complete your application, really streamlines the process, and you'll find other additional information and resources within our dashboard. Secondly, you can easily claim tax credits like the ERTC. I know some people are like, do I fill out an application? Do I not? But you can actually easily claim those through Gusto's platform. Once again, that link is in the description of this live stream. But as you see here, we'll give you the PPP application report, the forgiveness report, the access to the ERC, and so much more. Our team has done an incredible work in collaboration with a lot of you as small business owners asking for these features. And then lastly, just a call out once again, you can get the latest updates in your inbox by going to gsto.co/COVID news. Put in your name, email address, you're off to the races. So that's gsto.co/COVID news. All right, here we go. We're actually going to dive into Q&A time. Wow. Well, hey, it's good to see everybody. Hey. All right. So I think the first order of business, team, is to talk about, there seems to be a lot of confusion with a lot of the comments and just in general from people asking about applying for both the PPP and EIDL. Is it possible? What should everyone know about that? Has anything changed with round 2?
Jeanette, you want to take
feel free. Anybody jump
that
in.
piece?
Yeah, so generally, yes, borrowers can apply for both the PPP and EIDL, but funds cannot both be used for the same purpose is basically the short answer. Topher, is there anything else you want to add there?
Yeah, no major changes in round 2. Jeanette, covered some of those questions of what could be included if you applied for both the advance as well as the PPP. But yeah, no changes to that portion. Just make sure, like Jeanette was saying, you're not double dipping on that. You can only reimburse those once.
Awesome. Daniel asked, I do not receive a W-2, only an owner's draw. Can I still apply for the PPP?
Absolutely. Yes. All sole props, regardless of how you're receiving that, whether it's through an owner's draw or otherwise, reach out to your accountant, make sure that you can get whatever documents you can showing your take from the company. And then, talk to your lender to see what they're accepting in terms of proof of those owner's draws or other income that you took. But yes, don't let that hold you back. Definitely reach out to the lenders. They'll tell you what you need. Please apply for it as soon as possible.
Great. Shelly, Jeanette, this may be a question from you, from Jinan. He says, or she says, sorry about that. The SBA website states to promote access for smaller lenders and for their customers, SBA is currently only accepting loan applications from participating community financial institutions. If we bank with a large institution like Bank of America, and we received our first round with them, should we apply with a smaller bank instead, or will they eventually open it up to bigger banks?
So I'm going to actually jump in and give just one quick answer and then let it hand over to these wonderful folks who will get more detailed on the CDFIs and who's better. But one thing that I want to make sure is clear that I didn't mention is that when applying for a second draw, you can actually use the same documentation that you used for your first draw. And so there's actually an advantage to sticking with your original lender in that they don't have to get new reports from you in order to authorize. They can use that same amount to give you the okay for the maximum loan for your second draw loan. So there's a small advantage there for sticking with your original lender, but there's nothing in it that says you cannot. And the other thing I'll add is, even though you have that ability, you may want to run your report again anyways, because if you did it early on, things have changed. There are new expenses that are included. There are some things that may raise your max loan amount beyond what you had received in the first round. So still run it, but consider whether it's better for you to stick with your first draw lender if it's easier for you since it's the same paperwork.
Great. Thank you for that. Go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, I was also just going to add on that It is expected that other lenders will be open next week. So Tuesday was the latest date that we've been hearing. Of course, that timeline could always shift, but if this week, you're looking at your bank's site and they won't be open, because they may not be a community development financial institution, it's likely that they will be live next week. So I think the SBA has been clear in saying that there should be enough funds for everybody. So I think that, you should rest assured that your bank will likely go live next week.
Great. Jeanette, I think this may be a question for you from Kevin Manley. Thank you so much. There is a 2-day window right now, January 13th and the 14th, for second-time PPP borrowers seeking under 150 with minority, veteran, women ownership. Does anyone know whether or not the community financial institutions are offering this?
Yeah, I would love to also hear Shelley's thoughts on this, because I know we've been actually discussing the same question about which community development financial institution CDFIs are available and are kind of already offering loans at this time. We have heard of a couple of them, and I think that there are we have linked CDFIs on our link out list there. I would suggest kind of going through and looking at that list. Shelley, are there particular CDFIs that you want to mention that are offering loans at this time?
Yeah, actually, I can send out a list of the ones that we've heard are already open, and then confirm whether or not they're open for second loans yet. But we are hearing that a number of CDFIs are getting ready to open if they're not already open. So I think it's really just a matter of time, and we should see a number of them open up. We can continue to push information out on, I'm thinking on our blog, I'm kind of looking at our team here, because just things are changing rapidly as folks are testing and getting their system stood up this week, and then getting their portals open up next week for the regular banks and lenders. But yes, I'm hearing that we should have a number of CDFIs open up this week, if they're not already.
It's great. Here's one that I think sounds really pressing. Benjamin said, are there rules for keeping or needing to keep all my employees on payroll? All of my employees are furloughed, even with this round 2. I won't be able to afford to pay everyone. Can I officially lay some employees off?
Yeah, really tough question, tough situation to be in, obviously. And the hope is that we'll be able to leverage these PPP loans in order to alleviate some of that stress. But they also recognize, that there are some issues there with folks being able to retain. So the rules that we got in the last round still apply for safe harbors and things of that nature, especially for those folks who take loans above 150K. But the good news, like I said during the presentation, if it's less than 150K, the certifications that you have to give are actually far more limited. It's just tell us the number of employees you were able to retain, and tell us, certify that you use 60% of this on payroll costs and the other 40% on eligible costs. So it simplifies it for those less than 150K, but keeps the same safe harbor rules that existed for all others. So my suggestion would be, if you work with a payroll provider who does a report, this will be a lot easier, because I know a lot of the payroll companies are helping folks track full-time equivalents or FTE counts to make sure that you're meeting the requirement to get full forgiveness. So I guess not an easy answer. If it's over 150K, you're definitely going to still need to do some tracking there. But if it's less, the burden got a lot easier for you.
Great. And I think in the same vein of safe harbors, a question was asked whether or not safe harbors work with the second draw.
Yeah, so same requirements for forgiveness that apply to the first draw. So it's not any different when you go between a first draw or second draw in terms of forgiveness. The same 150K, under that is the simple, above that still requires that you follow the same rules that existed before.
Great. Here's a question from Wes. Thank you so much, Wes. I own a manufacturing and retail business. The NAICS code on our tax filings lists us as a manufacturing. Can I maybe apply, I think is what it meant to say, but can I apply for the 2.5x payroll for manufacturing and 3.5x payroll for retail, or should it all be just the 2.5?
Really good question. I have not seen anything that gives the ability for a business to apply that different multiples for different parts of their business. You should check with the lender for sure. Make sure that they're clear on what your business is and how your classification should go. They might suggest, if more of your business is on the retail side than on the manufacturing side or something along those lines, maybe there's a reason that you could use the 72 over the manufacturing one. But I don't have a specific answer on that one, unfortunately. I've seen nothing that says you're allowed to use different multiples. Definitely check with the lender to make sure. But regardless, the 2.5 is going to be a safe bet for sure.
Great. Thank you for that. Anyone can tackle this one. Christine Grice, thank you so much for your question. You asked, if we are an S Corp and just started in January 2020, but did not run W-2 payroll, only contractors, can we apply for PPP Round 1?
That one's actually, unfortunately, that's going to be a really tough answer for you, because January 2020 means that you didn't have the 2019 numbers to show an average employee cost that will get you to the loan that you're likely going to be hoping for to support your employees now in 2021. And you're only supposed to use that time frame between when you started your business until February 15th in order to determine what your average should be. So I don't have an easy answer for you, unfortunately. I think this is disappointingly a part that doesn't really help a lot of those newly formed entities that came about in January and February before the pandemic hit. But still, check with the lender, see what their requirements are, and see if there's any developments on their side of how to calculate that max. But my expectation would be it's not going to be any higher of a maximum than it would have been in round 1.
Thank you.
I will mention that you can apply for an EIDL loan if you were in business by January 31st, 2020, which was the date of disaster declaration. So in case that helps you, you may be eligible for the EIDL loan.
Great. Jeanette, this may be a question for you from Raul, but he said, let me get it up in front of me. If we are applying for the first draw, do you recommend we go with a CDFI instead of our regular big bank we work with?
So I think, we don't make particular recommendations on that front. I think, would advise you to kind of consider your own existing relationship with your bank and, how your experience has been with them. I think arguing in favor of CDFIs, they do sometimes have specific resources intended to serve customers. Some CDFIs, for example, have business advising services that they provide for free, partly because their mission is to help underserved communities, and they have, although not all of them are nonprofits, they do have kind of a nonprofit feel to them, where they are focused on the whole community and kind of mission-based advising and lending. So I think that is one benefit of CDFIs. On the flip side, CDFIs are often smaller institutions, right, who may have less resources, fewer staff. And so that's just something to keep in mind. And I think, really, it's an individual decision. I think that, we're happy to kind of help provide those lists of lenders that are participating and help shepherd people through available options, but can't make a recommendation on that front.
Great. Thank you so much. Shelly, question for you from Lori Livingston. Thank you, Lori. But she said, she asked, can you please address the logistics around just how to take advantage of both the ERC and the PPP Round 2?
Yeah, it'll depend on who's running your payroll. And so if you're a Gusto customer, we're working on instructions about how to support ERC, if you also participated in a PPP loan in 2020. But I will say it will take some careful coordination with your tax advisor to make sure that there's no double dipping happening. We are working on getting the employee retention credit up and running in our system for 2021. We obviously supported it in 2020 and are getting ready to turn that back on for 2021 with the new limits and credit amounts. And so stay tuned. We'll continue to share out information about the ERC for 2021 and give instructions about what will need to be done for folks that want to go back and adjust 2020, where they maybe didn't participate in employee retention credit for a period where they also didn't have a forgivable loan for PPP. One thing is you'll need to coordinate with your payroll service provider because they won't know what amounts of your loans were forgiven. So they'll need that information from you to figure out how to amend any prior periods. So it will take some pretty tight coordination between you, your tax advisor, and whoever's running your payroll to make sure you're not double dipping. But if you're a Gusto customer, connect, watch our help center and watch an app. We'll put up all kinds of banner messaging as soon as it's available. If you're with another payroll service provider, check with them and their help center for guidance on how to coordinate those two programs, because there could be some risk of double dipping. So be very, very careful there.
Great, thank you. Great question for the EIDL. Anyone who isn't a U.S. citizen, can they be eligible for the EIDL? That is, if they own a business in the States, but they're not a citizen, can they access the EIDL?
That is a good question. I think that so the requirements for EIDL funding are, businesses with 500 or fewer, sole props, independent contractors, tribal businesses, cooperatives, and employee-owned businesses. I am not quite sure of the answer to the citizen question. Would love to ask if Topher or anyone else on the panel has information there, and will otherwise put that on my list to take a look at and get back to you all.
Yeah, I can definitely say that for the PPP side, they've added restrictions on companies owned or with members of a board who are from the Republic of China or the People's Republic of China or Hong Kong. And so there are some specific restrictions that they have added in the legislation. But that, as far as I can tell, is specific to PPP. And so I don't know how the SBA will be processing that, or if they're interpreting it a different way to also apply to other types of loans that they're doing. Definitely check in with the SBA on that one. And sorry, Will, if I have just a second, I misspoke on one of the last questions. I don't want to dissuade anyone from applying. So I want to make sure that I'm clear for the person who started their business in 2020. I forgot that, you are allowed to use 2019, 2020, or the 12 months trailing before your loan. So definitely reach out to that lender and see if you can use 2020 numbers instead for figuring out your max loan. Sorry, I misspoke there.
No worries.
And I do want to add in a little information. If I recall correctly, so I do definitely recommend checking out the SBA site and SBA information. But if I do recall correctly, there are provisions and kind of guidance that SBA has put out on non-citizens, and particularly qualifications if individuals are non-citizen nationals or qualified aliens, kind of as the SBA defines those categories. Then the individual will be eligible if they own 20% or more of the business and are classified under those categories. Then that is likely that there may be eligibility. But again, there's kind of a lot of details around who qualifies into each of those different buckets and how do you make sure that you kind of meet those requirements. So I would recommend checking out the SBA website, chatting with them if you can, and finding more information that way.
Great. I know we're over time, but let's do just 2-3 minutes of just quick questions, yes, no answers. And Mark, you said, can you send a PPP application to more than one institution? First person to speak gets the answer.
Yes.
Yes. Wonderful. Thank you. Can an S Corp owner apply for PPP? I think the answer is yes.
Yes.
I think the answer is yes too.
Yeah. Yeah. I think a lot of companies can apply. What about workers' comp? Can it be included as part of payroll cost?
Yes.
Yes. Great. Let me find a couple more. Yes, this video will stay on YouTube. So that's an easy question to answer. Let me find a few more. May I use my bank statement as proof of owner draw?
I think a
Check
lot
with
of
your
the,
lender, but yes.
and I think the
Oops.
lenders are going to want to see tax returns as well.
Yeah. So complicated, yes. So yes, you can, but work with your lender. If it turns into a loan, or PPP, or maybe EIDL turns into a loan, or no, PPP turns into a loan, what percentage is the loan rate? I think it's 1%, right?
1%.
Yes, it's 1%.
Good. I think that's good. I mean, there are a lot of questions. Unfortunately, we couldn't get in front of a lot of them. We want to thank you so much for your time. Also, big clap for the panel. Topher, Shelly, Jeanette, thank you so much for your expertise and hard work at Gusto. Very honored to work alongside you. So is everyone at Gusto. So thank you for joining today's event. We want to thank you. If you click in the description, you'll get all the links that we referenced throughout the event. If you want to sign up for that newsletter, that's at gsto.co/COVID news. But go to gusto.com. There's more resources there. Thank you, everyone. Have a great week, and we'll talk to you soon.